Absolutely not. Look, in your condition, there's no way I'm letting you do this shit without help.
Dude, it's fine. It's just like I said, I just need to buy some groceries, you know, eggs, milk, crayons, stuff like that. Then I just take it back to my pocket dimension and make some chicken parmesan.
See, that's what's bothering me.
Relax, I'm not about to put milk in the chicken parmesan. What do I look like, Linda?
What?
Never mind.
Look, it's the whole pocket dimension thing you keep talking about. You live down the street, my man. This whole shit about a pocket dimension is worrying me. You acting real weird.
Are you sure you're not just trying to give Dale time to calm down over the laundry thing? My goals can be multifaceted. I'm not one-dimensional. Jacob, I'm fine. Really. I told Dale about the whole thing with the dude reconstructing the universe, and clearly I'm remembering stuff that exists that you aren't. It's fine.
All the more reason you need somebody to ground you in the world you're actually in, homie. I know what's going on here, and you live here, at least as far as I've always been aware. I just don't think it's necessarily a good idea for you to be going off on all this wannabe Magic the Gathering bullshit.
I don't really know how you can say that.
You know what? Never mind. I get what you're driving at. But speaking of Magic the Gathering, I would have expected you to cover the game theory video on it rather than the Genshin Impact shit.
I mean, you know, I probably could have, but I've seen the video. It's not bad. It's really just basic concepts of game theory applied to MTG. It's nothing worth getting worked up about.
Huh. The fuck is this then?
Ladies and or gentlemen.
Oh, great! Fucking great! Awesome! Fuck!
Allow me to introduce GodOfKa, a channel that I am having difficulty deciphering their intent on YouTube, or in fact their entire existence. They do fake Grand Order stuff, which I know almost nothing about. They did a single video on a Yu-Gi-Oh archetype that I bet a lot of you wished I cared enough about to cover. And most importantly, for the purposes of this video, they did this.
I thought you were covering the video we did on MatPat's Magic the Gathering video.
Now, without bringing up that there's a sequel to this video entitled My Dad Coming Back on His Harley Davidson.
Oh, wow. Engaging. How does this channel only have 13 subscribers?
I know, right? Anyway, here's the dumb video about the funny land game.
Hello everyone, GodOfKa here, and welcome to my first commentary in a series I will be calling Commentaries of Ka.
Alright, let's unpack a thing or two here, for real, for real. First, the audio mixing is atrocious. Like, it doesn't sound as bad here, but everything really is just loud. The pace of your speech as well feels kind of stretched out. And to be fair, to some extent, it's just the way that you talk based on what I see from an unscripted video on your channel. But to be honest, there's a very distinct difference in how you sound on special delivery and how you sound with scripts. And, well, there's one way I can really describe your intonations with your scripted content.
You know, cringe.
And see, again, when you're actually just talking, your words feel far less spaced out and slowed down. And the zoom timing is just funny, but not in a way where I feel like you're doing something right. So, yeah. First tip, the way you present yourself is kind of a hot mess, and I'd actually look towards maybe practicing your lines so that they come out more natural and less, you know, staggered.
Before I begin, here is a little bit of background that inspired me to make this. I was introduced to commentaries via Just a Robot and Manga Common.
Just a robot? That explains the robotic delivery.
Be nice!
No.
Alright, fair enough. Although, this is the only avatar image we're gonna get for this entire time. I personally wouldn't go this route, as there's really nothing visually going on, even compared to the typical slideshow commentator, or in fact, even compared to the people that you say inspired you. And yes, to the asshole in the back, I know I could have already said that, but I mean, you know, fuck you. In particular.
I've seen the ups and downs. Finally experienced something I did not expect. MatPat from Game Theory could be wrong.
You are a fan of manga common, and you are surprised at the prospect of MatPat being wrong. Think about that for a second, my man.
I saw his infamous Persona 4 theory and seen a Let's Play of that same game, so I knew this theory was bunk. But wanting to make sure, I went to see if anyone else made a commentary on the same video. I was surprised I wasn't the only person who knew this theory was wrong, but also learned a lot more about the theory's origin and the process Game Theory went through in making the video of said theory.
Alright, I wouldn't normally be ye who spends too much time talking about unnecessary details of the background of what you're covering, but this is pushing my patience on this kind of thing, and that's saying something. And what's worse, based on what you're about to say, which I have a different joke for, so I'm just gonna address this here, it's not even that you were originally gonna cover this video before settling on something else. No, it's that this is a completely unrelated video that happened to also be bad from the same channel. This really has nothing to do with the commentary that you're about to do, and you make no effort to tie it back in.
This was before I made my channel for all you mortals out there.
Oh, you're actually using the God thing as part of your gimmick. You know there's a reason I've been called the Godslayer since 2016, right?
Gradually, I wanted to make a commentary, but didn't know where to start. This took a long time and a lot of thinking, but I finally found it. And not surprising anyone, it's a Game Theory video.
See, now here you didn't really do a good job of linking that story of yours, and you very well could have. It may not be true that you decided your first commentary should be on Game Theory, and it took a while to find the right one. There could very well be something in the back of your mind that indicated as much. I think it engages better to tell the story about Persona 4 after establishing that your video would be on Game Theory, as it presents a nice misdirect, make it kind of sound like you're gonna cover that video, but then be like, everybody knows about that one though, and I have one that not many people talk about having problems. In theory, a lot of this stuff is really minor, but in reality, it's just a case of flow of your script making you sound more awkward, which is not helped when you honestly sound like you're struggling to remember what the next word you're supposed to say is as you're saying it.
This is Game Theory. I lost every game of Magic, so you don't have to. I knew I wanted to cover something from him, as it seems like a metaphorical rite of passage to cover one of his videos.
I mean, there's plenty of people who haven't covered MatPat, but, you know, go off, I guess. Can still feel like a rite of passage for you, but there's a narrative lack of clarity again. Remember when I said that it may or may not be true that you decided your first commentary should be on Game Theory? You just confirmed that it is true, and could have saved your script a lot of turbulence in getting to the point by just saying that, which would also link to your Persona 4 story a little bit better.
Some are either too old or I have no interest in. This is the only one where I have somewhat of an interest in, and I even know a few people IRL who pointed out some issues with it. So, all that I'll be saying here won't be coming from me alone.
Okay, so you're essentially saying that some of these points about this video were made by committee. And I want people to keep that in mind, because some of these issues with that context in mind are grotesque.
Hold up. So the age of the video is a factor, but he's covering a video that's 3 years old as of when his video came out.
I suppose it depends on what interests him, to be fair on that one, but yeah, it seems pretty weird that he's got such an interest in MatPat's content. He specifically wanted the rite of passage of covering it, and yet still so little of what MatPat covers appeals to him.
Did you know that One Piece has a card game? Get your copies of Charlotte Cracker from CoolStuffInc.com, now only $4.99.
Now, without further ado, roll the theory, Elizabeth.
This is just inconsistent branding, honestly, especially since Cleopatra is already in Fate, but no, gotta use the Hungarian serial killer waifu, apparently, for no reason. By the way, this is pretty damn lazy. Seriously, you're just kind of playing this random attack animation and putting text over it. Come on, do something with it.
I think he does this for the skip card too.
Are you gonna be fucking kidding me?
Today's episode is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast.
I'm getting a bad feeling from this alone. Sponsorships aren't bad, but as we will see further on, he's probably only doing this for the money the sponsorship is giving him.
That's just an overt contradiction. If you have a bad feeling from the sponsorship alone, that indicates that you do feel that the concept of the video being sponsored on its own is potentially bad. So presenting that sponsorships aren't bad contradicts that the fact it is sponsors is all it takes to make you uneasy. And then you say that additional context is what indicates he's only doing it for the money. Which means the bad feeling isn't from this alone!
Hey, how's this for a bad feeling? I got a bad feeling he's gonna say that MatPat isn't passionate about the subject he's talking about, with literally nothing indicating that to be the case.
Yeah, sure, bad feeling. You totally didn't just watch the video already and already know this is what he's gonna do.
Nah, it's just from this interjection, because that's what everybody who says this shit does.
Yes, she is a murderer. But, see those bottles? Gonna be hooching them bottles.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that goes through calculators faster than a Magic tournament grinder goes through card sleeves.
No, wait a minute, hold on. This is like one of my few problems with MatPat's video.
The thing about the sleeves?
Yeah! What kind of shitty sleeves are you buying? Seriously, I'm still using sleeves I played Big Boros and Theros in.
Nobody knows.
I had just become Boonslayer IRL.
Damn, bro, that's like fucking ancient Greece, ain't it?
I don't think you're aware how correct that is.
First, let's talk about that cold open, shall we? It seems weird what I just kind of presented you with, right? That something as mundane as a deck of cards would be able to produce something that is entirely unique, but consider this. Whenever you shuffle a 52 card deck, the number of possible combinations for that deck is over 80 million trillion, and then take that number and multiply it by another trillion.
But what does this have to do with Magic Arena?
Yes, she is a murderer.
Hey, let him cook?
That is more than the number of atoms in and on planet Earth. If every single person on Earth took a deck of cards and just started shuffling it 1,000 times every day for the rest of their lives, the odds of one of them winding up with a deck sequence that randomly matches up with the same random deck sequence of cards that you hold in your hands right now is still less than 1%. That is every single person on planet Earth 1,000 times a day for the rest of their lives, under 1%. And that's just the possibilities for one 52 card deck of cards. Imagine what you could do with something bigger, like say the granddaddy of all card games, Magic the Gathering.
You know, it's really interesting and strange and sexy, not that last one, how your clip ends with him explaining the connection. The vast number of possibilities with a 52 card standard playing deck is far less than the number of possible permutations with Magic the Gathering decks, which is going to tie into one of his tips for being a better player down the line. Although I can critique the way he worded himself here, Magic's the grandfather of trading card games. Incredibly relevant when you remember that he's comparing it to a traditional 52 card poker deck. But yeah, his mistake is nowhere near as bad as skipping over the point and then asking where the fuck it is.
I'm incredibly surprised you used Let Him Cook properly. More importantly, I don't think you realize that the video isn't just about Arena, but about Magic in general.
Oh no, we'll get there. Let me cook.
And you just fucked it up. Cool.
So today's episode is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast and their new online card game Magic Arena, which is great because it gives me a chance to redeem myself when it comes to online card games. You see, I'm kinda new to this world, and truth be told, I am not very good. Damn it, he blocked it.
What? No!
I hate effing card games.
Come on.
This sucks. Damn it.
Dude.
Damn it, and it reflected.
No!
I hate everything. I hate card games. Reflected!
Oh, God!
I told you!
It's the worst.
I hate it. I hate everything. I'm done.
This is why I don't think you did this for the passion of cards games. You were asked by Wizards of the Coast to do a video on Magic Arena. You accepted the offer, but had to do a theory on their game. While you are not only terrible at online cards games, but hate them as you've proven with your GT Live clip.
Oh wow, a spur of the moment reaction. That's totally indicative of his opinion at all times. Hell, I'd even argue that given the fact that this was an incredibly simplified card game that was within the context of a different game, that's not really a true indicator of how he feels. And really, it's just showing that he's new to this kind of thing and isn't very good. He's going to continue in this video by pointing out that he wants to be better at this stuff, by the way.
And the video didn't really need to be about Magic Arena for him to get paid for the promo spot. He just had to do the promo spot. Integrating the ad fully into the overall topic of the video is his own choice to make.
A choice, by the way, that's gonna bite you in the ass later.
I'm really curious to see how you work with this.
Not sure if Wizards knew about this when they contacted me about the episode, but in concept, I should be good at this game, right?
Oh, look, MatPat elaborating that he doesn't hate the idea of trading card games and pointing out that they should be within his wheelhouse based on what he specializes in. It's almost like he was reacting to bad beats and not saying card games are bad in general. Go figure.
Magic is a card game. It all boils down to math and statistics. So today, I wanted to figure out a way to outsmart the game of Magic. I want to dedicate a sponsored episode of this game theory to just make me a better player.
There is also luck that comes into play as well, especially with an online platform such as Magic Arena. You don't actually see the other person and find out what strategy they're playing before the game begins.
There's several problems with just this one statement. Let's start with knowing what your opponent is playing before you start. I would presume that you mean for this to be relevant when talking about any game mode where you queue up to face a random opponent. But the equivalent of that happens in a card shop too. It's called walking in and asking if anyone wants to play with no real discussion beforehand. You're more likely to know the person you're playing with if you go to the LGS in person, but, well, Arena has the ability for people to challenge each other directly, so that also exists on Arena. Of course, there's also a way you can at least have some idea of what your opponent might be playing and be prepared for that matchup before you even sit down in the first place, but we'll end up talking about that later. As for luck being involved though, you're right, it is. MatPat is actually going to talk explicitly about luck in just a moment.
Yes, she is a murderer.
Oh wait, sorry, my bad. When I said in a moment, I actually meant
To use our research and overanalysis skills to discover an optimal strategy, so quite frankly, I can suck less. That's it. That's all I want. Is that so much to ask? Can math make you a better Magic player? If you're a noob like me, can statistics and probability help you to compete in the major arenas?
During your skip screen. Because that's what probability is. That is twice that I've caught you skipping over something that overtly debunks your point. This is a very bad pattern for the first 7 minutes of your video. Would not recommend.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with Magic, the game has been around since 1993, and it currently has more than 20 million players worldwide, which means it's basically setting the standard for all trading card games to follow. Each player starts off with 20 life points and a deck of at least 60 cards. Unless, of course, you're playing Draft, or Sealed, or Commander, etc., etc. There's a lot of different ways to play this game. You win, very simply, by getting your opponent's life down to 0 via various summons, like zombies and dragons and bears, oh my. Or, my personal favorite method, by milling them out, which means getting them to draw their last card.
Boy, you must be a real snack if you prefer to do mill. Unless you would draw into your key cards, you will be taking a lot of losses. Maybe that's why you keep on losing, as the title of the video says, and as you showed earlier.
MatPat didn't really show himself playing Magic earlier. He showed himself playing a different card game, but you know what? That's the least egregious part of this point. Drawing into your key pieces being important is true for literally every deck. There are actually a lot of consistent ways to do mill, and mill has always been a sort of pet second tier strategy that a lot of people enjoy using, even if it's very rarely a top tier threat. I personally have made a video about a modern mill deck as well back in the day. And see, as someone who plays a bit of mill myself and knows quite a bit about different ways to execute it, you also have no idea what the weakness of the deck is? See, the problem isn't so much that getting your cards is inconsistent. At the end of the day, mill is kind of an aggro deck that attacks a different part of the game than life, which brings up the first problem. Mill decks have a tendency to have weak removal, because you can only run so much without weakening the mill strategy, which is part of the reason that my variation used red in order to play some burn spells to create both a means of removing threats and a more traditional method of winning the game. Second big weakness of mill is that some decks want to fill up their graveyard and will actually welcome you milling their cards. This is the reason I put Leyline of the Void in the sideboard in order to exile the entire graveyard, so that you can have it available against those decks in games 2 and 3. And I also is part of the reason for one of the signature cards in my version of the deck, Breaking and Entering, which served as copies 5 through 8 of Glimpse the Unthinkable, a concept we'll go over later, and a tech to be able to play the Reanimator deck's own graveyard threats against them. However, I still acknowledge that it's not a top tier strategy. Just because I have ways to plug up some of the weaknesses to make those matchups less of a negative doesn't mean that it still loses those weaknesses. But you know what? Matt even said it himself, that he doesn't expect to be a world champion. Let him run a little bit of jank, you elitist prick.
Yes, she is a murderer.
If we're gonna use scientific reasoning to become a master of the cards, we need to break this game down to its purest fundamentals. Magic is what's known as an imperfect game. Now, I don't mean that this game sucks. I mean, first off, it doesn't, but even if I did mean it that way, there is no way that the brand would ever let this episode see the light of day if that's what I really meant.
And the definition you give and examples of the opposites are really gonna bite you in the butt.
Spoiler warning, no they aren't, shut the fuck up, because he's defining a term. I'm gonna get more into this later when you say how it bites him in the ass, but you have no idea what you're talking about.
It wouldn't be a sponsored video if the host wasn't kissing up to the brand.
This isn't kissing up, this is just him clarifying a point in a semi-comedic way. Get your head out of your ass by Urza's fucking beard!
No, by imperfect, I mean that Magic is a game where you, as the player, only have partial information. Consider as your counterexample chess or checkers. You see all of your pieces as well as all of your opponent's pieces and know how all of those pieces can move at any given point in time. They are perfect games. You are working with perfect knowledge. Everything that can be known is known by both players all the time. Your ability to win chess or checkers or any other perfect game comes down to you using your knowledge more effectively than your opponent.
That effective use of the rules is still a wild card factor in those games you called perfect games. You don't know what your opponent will do with those pieces, and vice versa.
Do you have any idea how angry this shit is making me? You are saying that the games don't have perfect knowledge, that you knowing everything that can be done doesn't matter because you cannot read your opponent's mind. I don't think you understand the concept. In spite of MatPat's honestly very good explanation, I'm gonna struggle to dumb it down more than what he did, but I'm damn sure gonna try, because apparently that's what I need to do. The difference between a perfect and imperfect game is not based on if one player is able to be more skilled than another player at all. It is based on the amount of information about the game state that both players have. For example, in chess, I always know where my opponent's pieces are and how those pieces move. Even though I do not know how my opponent will use this information, I do know how they can. In chess, you're not gonna suddenly start moving a rook diagonally because you had a secret special power up your sleeve that lets you do that. The rook moves in straight vertical and horizontal lines, and both players know that. For Magic to be a perfect game, you would have to have knowledge of every card in the opponent's hand, the exact order of their deck, the exact order of your deck. Like, he's not just making up this concept out of his ass either. This is an academically researched and discussed concept of game theory. Not the channel, the actual academic field that the series is named after. Read a goddamn book for once in your fucking life and stop opening your mouth when you have no idea what you're talking about, you dicking chucklefuck!
Wow, I don't think I've ever seen anybody get that pissed off and sound like that much of a nerd at the same time. That's impressive, honestly.
But games like Magic are all about imperfect knowledge. Sure, you know what's in your hand and what you have in your deck, but the order your deck is shuffled in? No clue. What your opponent has in his hand or in his deck? Unclear. Your ability to win in Magic really depends on two things: a combination of strategy against your opponent and chance against the odds.
And the chance your opponent won't make a certain move that will lead to your downfall, like in the chess example you graciously provided.
The chance. The chance. What was that second concept that MatPat just fucking said? Oh, but of course, we're talking about the chess example. What's the image on the strategy card? What is it fucking showing there? It's almost like what you're talking about is strategy already. I'm fucking shitting your pants right now, bro. What the fuck are you doing?
Oh, how do we use math then to better our odds of winning? Well, let's start with overcoming that first variable of chance. Not everyone can possess the soul of an ancient pharaoh and tap into the heart of the cards, which allows them to get exactly the card that they need right when they need it.
I would like to make an example where luck is a factor, but Boonslayer did it better in their video on Mother's Basement's video on how cards games make bad anime.
No. You keep my name out of your fucking mouth with that bullshit. My point was that the top deck was a highly dramatic part of a game that is a real factor in these games. For that matter, you've also butchered Mother's Basement's point in that video. Like, he was saying that people made bad anime out of card games, not that card games make bad anime. As a matter of fact, he specifically made the point of talking about how they could do it better. But like I said, the way you butchered his point is very tertiary compared to how badly you've butchered mine. Notice how when Mother's Basement talks about the importance of deck construction, at no point do I ever say he's wrong in pointing out that putting cards that work well together is important. Just that he's downplaying how much of a factor luck is. The big difference between these is that MatPat isn't saying that luck doesn't exist. He's very much saying that it does. But he's trying to skew luck back in a favor of results that favor the player.
Yes, she is a murderer.
For a real world example, let's look at the deck that won one of the biggest Magic tournaments recently, Mythic Championship 3 in Las Vegas, where nearly $1 million of prize money was up for grabs. There's the deck. Now, you may look at this list and not recognize any of these cards, but one thing that you'll immediately notice is that there's a lot of redundancy here in this deck, with practically every card having at least one, and sometimes up to 3 other duplicates in that deck of 60.
Thank your editor because they caught you in their safety net. You said 1 to 3 copies while they pulled out 2 to 4 copies of respective cards. In your pot shot on Yu-Gi-Oh? Yeah, 1 to 3 copies makes sense. But this is Magic. Clearly you didn't play the game. But your editor knows enough about the meta to know better.
What the fuck does the meta have to do with...
No, we need to address this one problem at a time. First of all, big shock. GodOfKa doesn't know words. MatPat said 1 to 3 other copies, dingus. As in, if you include the original, then it's 2 to 4. But that's not the meta either. That's the rules of the game, allowing multiple copies of the same card. And I'm sure you could argue how it in some pedantic way does involve the meta. That's not how you use that term. Even if it actually was MatPat not knowing and his editor knowing, you were talking about knowing the rules, not the fucking meta. The meta would be more like why he's using Narset, Parter of Veils, for example, or why he's using 2 copies instead of 3 or 4 or only 1. Decks with a lot of card draw are super common, so he wants to be able to counter that card draw, but he doesn't need too much of it because it's a legendary card. That's an example of the meta. Stupid, dumbass, stupid.
And for players who are more experienced in Magic, you'll notice that even the cards that are one-offs actually seem to function similarly to other cards that are already in the deck. Simic Guildgate, for instance, is just there to serve as an additional, though slightly weaker, extra blue-green mana source, because he is already maxed out on Breeding Pool and Hinterland Harbor.
I would counter that Breeding Pool is weaker than the 2 other cards, because you have to pay 2 life to keep it untapped when you play it.
First of all, you're not paying 2 life, you're taking 2 damage. There's a difference between those, but it's not relevant for this example. And more importantly, if you don't need the mana immediately, you can just let it stay tapped until your next turn. It's still gonna untap even if you don't shock yourself. The Simic Guildgate doesn't even have the option to have it come in untapped. There's no way that you can say that Breeding Pool is worse than Simic Guildgate, except in a deck where gates matter, like my Maze's End deck in Historic Arena. I could see the point in saying that Breeding Pool, at least in this context, is a little bit worse than Hinterland Harbor in most situations. Breeding Pool is better on turn 1, but as soon as you have another forest or island out, it becomes almost strictly worse, since only Nissa's Ultimate searches for non-basic lands with basic land types in this deck. But to say it's worse in this deck than Simic Guildgate is asinine. Not to mention, you're trying to tell the guy who won with this strategy that you know better than him, which you clearly do not, because you're saying Simic Guildgate is better than Breeding Pool. What are you doing? What are you doing? This was written by community. This was... Oh my god!
Like you said, both players have 20 life points earlier in your video. That is a valuable resource.
Okay, so apparently you watched the part of my video about luck and not the part where I went through this exact decision tree to counter Mother's Basement's comment that only the last life point matters. It's true that life beyond the last point mattering depends on what you're up against, but you don't need to stay at 20 life the entire game. Like I said before, if my options for a land to play on turn 1 are between Breeding Pool and Hinterland Harbor, I'm gonna play Breeding Pool every time, especially since it turns on Hinterland Harbor coming in untapped. And I'm probably gonna take the 2 if I have something like an Opt in my hand in this deck.
And Breeding Pool doesn't even search out a land for you.
What? None of them do! They are the lands! They produce the mana! Searching for lands isn't even something most cards in the deck do! What the fuck are you talking about?
Although the deck's holder did win with this deck, so there's more to that than either of us can understand.
No. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that MatPat doesn't understand it. MatPat said that Simic Guildgate was functioning as an extra blue-green source because he had maxed out on better versions of this card. So therefore, MatPat understands why this choice in the mana base was made. Just because you don't understand what MatPat is telling you doesn't mean that he doesn't understand what he is saying. You're the one making the assertion that Breeding Pool is worse than Simic Guildgate. I still can't get over that, and I still can't get over the fact that your points apparently aren't just from you according to yourself. So your friends are clearly missing the basic idea that having an option to do something is better than not having that option at all.
Blink of an eye, callous dismissal, also one-offs, but do very similar things for the deck.
This isn't it, but I will point it out. Blink of an eye is outright better, because if it was kicked, which in this case means you paid 2 of any mana and 2 blue mana for its cost, you make it so that using it is a +1 instead of a -0 in card advantage.
I mean, you're right about one thing. This really isn't it. Like, at all. I have so many things to unpack about what you just said here. Okay. I know you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player, and Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't really have tempo in the same way that Magic does, so allow me to explain the concept of tempo as it exists in Magic for you. Typically, if you were to use something like Compulsory Evacuation Device, it'd be pretty weak in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, because they can very easily just replay the card that was bounced. However, because in Magic you have to pay mana for cards, returning a card to the hand can delay your opponent's play by an entire turn much more easily than it would in Yu-Gi-Oh! Unless you were sending back what they normal summoned in a deck that actually cares about that. This is what's called tempo. It's an entire style of advantage that does a lot of lifting in Magic. It means that sometimes you're playing cards not to necessarily have more cards than your opponent, but to keep them from being able to use the effects of their good cards and give you time to use the effects of your good cards. Card advantage, on the other hand, is in relation to the number of cards you have in hand and on the field, or in your graveyard depending on what deck you're running, although in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's pretty much every deck. In essence, it's strictly the number of cards you have access to. So if you lose access to one card, and the opponent still has access to their card but in a different zone from where they originally had access to it, you're actually at a -1, because the tempo puts you further ahead by stopping that card from operating for a turn, or forcing the opponent to spend mana they may want to develop the board more, the card advantage matters less, which is why the concept of card advantage is rarely used in Magic other than strictly in terms of card draw, because it's actually more normal to go -1 to allow yourself to build tempo while your opponent loses tempo, since you can't just dump out your whole hand unless you play Storm. My friends tell me not to play Storm, but I don't listen. But let's operate the way your head is at for the moment. Let's use the simplified concept of card advantage. Treat using one card to bounce a card as a +0, full stop. Blink of an eye can allow us to pay 4 mana in order to go +1 with it, which is nice. Callous Dismissal, on the other hand, by your own logic, is a +1 at 2 mana. Why? Because it puts a token on the board, which is also card advantage, no matter which definition we roll with. So in other words, if we simplified card advantage the way you're doing, then Callous Dismissal would be the overtly better card because it gives us +1 card advantage with 2 less mana. So even when you redefine the rules of engagement, you still don't know what you're talking about. And MatPat does. Neither card is primarily in the deck for either of these other features, but instead to bounce permanents. But one being better than the other is situation dependent. Thus why the deck includes one of each. And to be honest, they're probably only included to be used during game 1 and are among the first cards to be sided out in most post-board matchups based on the rest of the deck. It just doesn't seem like it cares about anything other than pure aggro decks swinging in.
Yes, she is a murderer.
If your 60 card deck of Magic has all unique cards, that's 8.3 times 10 to the 81st possible deck orders. That is a huge number. But with all the duplicates that you see in this championship-winning deck, its creator, Matthias Leverato, has knocked that down to 8.1 times 10 to the 63rd possible permutations. Now, that is still a massively huge number, right? Sure, it is, but the percent change from this first number to this new one is actually him reducing variability by almost 100%. He reduced the effects of chance on his deck by nearly 100% simply by duplicating a good number of the cards.
You also had to take into account the meta at that time. Based on what we see alone, it was a very heavy green-blue meta. The Simic Guild holds the positives of green and blue.
Well done, Mr. God. I am impressed. I have tricked kings into ruin and pretenders to humility, and yet you have managed to uncover the source of my power. You dirty, dirty boy.
Yeah, for those who don't have the superpower of media literacy, this is sarcasm and he has no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Looking at the meta and just saying what colors the deck is. You didn't say it has the strengths of blue and green, but don't even talk about at all what those strengths might be. Right, okay, that's in no way how the meta works. And there's so many problems with just you saying it's Simic, therefore it has stuff that blue and green does, that I'm not even gonna go there at this point. Looking at what the meta is doesn't mean looking at what the deck is. It means looking at what it was up against. And some of that information I can get from what's in this deck. Based on what I'm seeing here, Matthias wasn't expecting to need to deal with aggro decks very much and was more focused on getting enough mana to cast Nexus of Fate as many times over as possible, which means he was expecting mid-range strategies that would have a limited number of answers. Probably most of his threats were going to come in the form of swings shortly before his Nexus plays came online, based on the root snares, and he was ready to sideboard against both mid-range decks going more aggressive and control decks trying to counterspell his Nexus of Fates. Now, I can actually prove that this is what he was dealing with the most, because sure enough, 4 of the top 8 were Esper Hero. which is a mid-range deck built around Hero Precinct 1, and another Esper deck that was more of a control show. Although, I was notably incorrect about him dealing with counterspells just looking at his sideboard. Turns out he was the only one with negates, meaning really he just found a hole in the metagame by being the only one to stop instants and sorceries. But that actually accentuates my point. No, looking at just the winning deck doesn't give you a good view of the meta, nor is it that relevant to what MatPat is talking about. He was saying that running duplicates of cards that were needed for his strategy made luck less of a factor. And yes, what those components are is dependent on the meta in many cases. But that doesn't really have anything to do with the point that MatPat is making here, which is running dupes is good. So you're going on a completely off-kilter side tangent, not elaborating on the things that make your side tangent make any kind of sense, and also being wrong about it at the same time. Every error you could have made, you made here.
And here is where they cover all of the IRL interactions which do not matter in an online platform. Skipping time.
Except the video isn't explicitly about Arena, it's about Magic the Gathering. Yes, he's being paid to promote Arena, but that doesn't mean that every single thing he says must strictly be related to Arena. For example, Commander is not on Arena. Brawl is a more limited form of Commander with slightly different rules, but Commander itself is not a format that you can play on Magic Arena because it requires implementing a ton of cards and wonky interactions. But he still mentioned it, because promoting Magic the Gathering in general also serves the purpose of promoting Magic Arena. The goal of the ad was to let people know about Arena and get people want to play Magic, paper or digital. And how do I know this? I read the title of the video, which doesn't actually mention Arena. In fact, he barely says anything about Arena other than using footage from it. Better on you to not cover real interaction stuff anyway, because, well, it's really just body language analysis and reading people. I'd be concerned with how wrong you wind up being about that anyway. That being said, I'm still replacing your skip card because it's shit.
Murderer?
A lot of decisions go into playing a single hand of Magic, and if you're paying attention, you can actually start to see how your opponent reacts in certain situations, which ends up giving you a lot more free information. First and foremost, pay attention to the speed at which your opponent plays. If your opponent is just speeding through their turn, playing drop after drop, but then suddenly pauses for a long time on their turn before playing nothing, it seems like a good chance that they might be holding something in their hand for your next turn.
Or they're thinking for a moment instead of going through the motions because of what you have on the board.
It could also mean that they got up to pee and came back in the middle of their turn and went, oh shit, before passing. What's your point? As someone who actually plays Arena quite a bit, I can honestly say that he's right. Generally, going quickly through the turns and then suddenly slowing down is a sign that they have something they're thinking about. Your board state is also relevant to what they might be thinking too, but that doesn't mean that them pausing when they previously weren't pausing isn't a sign that they have something they need to think about. It just means that this, like any other social cue, isn't something you take in isolation, but rather in the context of everything around it.
Typically, if people have multiple options, they're gonna take a little bit longer to figure out what their optimal strategy is. Secondly, pay attention to the lands that they're tapping, or actively not tapping. If your opponent consistently leaves the same 3 lands untapped, 1 island and 2 randoms, they're probably telegraphing a certain card, or just bluffing about it. But either way, it's something to take note of.
Or they don't have the right cards in their hand at the moment. That is an option.
It's actually relevant that MatPat described a consistent pattern of mana being left up. Like, part of strategic maneuvering in this game involves playing around what your opponent is likely to have based on the way they are using their resources. And hell, for that matter, them not having the right cards in their hand and bluffing that they have a specific answer isn't mutually exclusive, because bluffing means that you're pretending to have something that you don't. You pointed out earlier that you don't know how the opponent is going to use game knowledge, but looking for tells about what the opponent is thinking where they don't think that they have any is part of that. These are hints at what the opponent may be thinking, and, you know, it may be wrong. The tells in real life that MatPat was talking about can also be wrong, since people can actually fake the way they react to the board state, or do what those of us with a lot of competitive experience do, and play Magic like we're playing poker. Gee, I wonder why so many poker players start playing Magic. But that doesn't mean that knowing what to look for isn't a helpful basic fucking skill to have for a card game. Because fun fact, if you know what you're looking for, you also know how to fake what you're looking for.
But that's where I'll be ending it because he tends to not go over 20 minutes. So I think it's time for my final thoughts. Surprisingly, this wasn't as bad as I originally thought. But because of the limit he's putting himself at, he can't elaborate further on things.
Wait, do you have a 20-minute limit you put on yourself? Hate to break it to you, but he elaborated on a lot since he was giving a basic overview of things that make you better at the game. Wasn't meant to be an in-depth masterclass on the subject.
I'm having trouble picking up on what MatPat didn't elaborate on either. You, on the other hand, did a lot of non-elaboration. For example, you said that Simic has the strengths of blue and green. Aye, what are those strengths then, dummy?
Holy hell, I forgot you were here.
Oh, yeah, I went to get a hot dog.
Honestly, fair. Anyway, I did more in this video to explain how Matthias's deck worked in terms of metagame than you did, and I could go further, but it's really not the point of the video, like, at all. Half the time what you were saying made literally no sense, and the other half, you just completely missed the words or even basic concepts that MatPat was spelling out for you. This was so bad, and if your version of elaboration is Simic is blue-green, and to say the word meta so much that you may as well be a 2010 countdown YouTuber trying and failing miserably to revive your floundering career with shitty CinemaSins knockoffs on Smash Brothers parody that no one gives a shit about.
Damn, bro, I thought I was the one who didn't have any chill.
There is none, not a milliliter of chill. My dude, if this video is any indication of how you play Magic, then you have a lot of work to do before you are even close to understanding the game at the level you need to in order to be able to make content about it. I'm not about to tell you to give up, but I think you should take a deep look at your understanding of this game, and it might not be for you to make content about Magic. That's fine. I determined that the Pokemon TCG moved to a point where I didn't like it anymore, and I did the same with Yu-Gi-Oh! In spite of how highly ranked I was in Pokemon. And I don't really want to make an investment needed to be a competitive Magic player again. But I'll be damned if I'm gonna sit back and let somebody make a video like this, especially one that attaches my name to its points and not address what's wrong with what they're saying, including how they misinterpret what I said. Keep my name out your fucking mouth if you don't want the hands, bitch. That's the end of the video. I ain't got a closing sketch. That's all the closing sketch I fucking need. Word. Word.